Good morning. Uh, we are going to learn some basic ideas about the Shamatha and Vipassana meditation and how to use it for our understanding of the practice. Hmm? The Shamatha and Vipassana meditation in history of Buddhism has undergone uh, long theoretical development. It is rather complex. So, what is conceived as shamatha and vipassana in the agamas, in the what most of the scholars call the early teaching of Buddhism, uh, seems to be for an outward observer uh, very different from what is being taught nowadays in the so-called Mahayana countries, especially in China and Tibet. So uh, the first motherland of Buddhism is India, and all these ideas about meditation, in a way, developed there in India. You will find all the basic concepts of the uh, Shamatha, Vipassana, and its development in Indian Buddhism itself. However, these ideas they were adopted to the conditionings in the second and the third motherland of Buddhism in China and Tibet, and therefore, for an outward observer, the concepts seem to be sometimes quite radically different. Yet, this is only for an outward observer. If we study Buddhism, so there is always a logic in the development that the Buddhist teachings have undergone, especially particularly the shamatha and vipassana concepts, which are, so to say, uh, the core of the Buddhist teachings. Actually, according to Yogacara Bhumi Shastra and other scriptures, all the kusala dharmas, all the wholesome phenomena are contained in the understanding of the shamatha and vipassana practice. So, whatever uh, positive uh, whatever wholesome actions we engage in, uh, they can be summarized and are actually summarized in the practice of shamatha and vipassana. So that is the core of the Buddhist teachings. So in the framework of our introduction, it would not be out of place to introduce some basic concepts of shamatha and vipassana as presented in nowadays, unfortunately, the only living tradition which leads its practitioners to the state of arahat. The Buddha is also an arahat, but uh, he is different from the other arahats. He is, so to say, the greatest of the arahats, the teacher of the arahats, because of the depth of his understanding. So, unless we study the shamatha and vipassana of the Buddha and understand the depth of the perfect Buddha's understanding of shamatha and vipassana, which is the summary of all the wholesome dharmas. So, in a way, whatever Buddhism we may study, our knowledge of Buddhism will be very limited. So, even if we emphasize the practice of shamatha and vipassana in the agamas or nikayas, and as explained in the Abhidharma in detail, as Abhidharma is a teaching of Dharma in detail. This is actually the meaning of Abhidharma. So, in the agamas, the practice of shamatha and vipassana is just touched in general uh, uh, in its general meaning, in general features, and these general features, they are further analyzed in the Abhidharma teachings, and the Abhidharma teachings is actually what made these different schools of Buddhism different. The basic teachings are practically referring to the same sources. Uh, so when we talk of shamatha, samatha means, of course, appeasement. If our mind is not appeased, this is one of the most important principles of Buddhism. Without an appeased mind, we are unable to see things as they really are. Hmm? So only a mind in samadhi can see the things as they are. Hmm? Samahitam chitam yata bhutam pashyati. Only the mind in samadhi can see things as they are. Seeing things as they are is the meaning of vipassana. Vipassana literally means seeing by differentiation. This prefix vi has a meaning of differentiation. And shamatha means the calmness or appeasement, from the Sanskrit root sham, which means to appease. Hmm? So first we have to appease the mind to see things as they really are. For the Buddhists, seeing things as they really are means actually seeing things in terms of impermanence, of the unsatisfactory state of impermanence, of the selflessness of impermanence, and the impurity of all that appears in the impermanent mind. So these are the, so to say, the pillars on which the understanding of Buddhist teachings is based. In order to see the phenomena which arise in the mind, and the phenomena which arise in the mind are by their very nature impermanent. So we have to appease the mind. That is the first step to do, appease the mind to be able to observe things as they are. In the Abhidharma teachings, as they developed, the no matter whether in Theravada or in Sarvastivada, which are the only schools whose literature is still preserved, practically in its completeness in Pali language or in Chinese, and to great extent also in Tibetan. Hmm? So the basic idea of shamatha is they are, so to say, 9 kinds of samadhi, which uh, one who aspires to master meditation should master according to the Abhidharma. Hmm? The same ideas you will find in the Theravada Abhidharma, also in Abhidharma Kosha and other the Sarvastivada scriptures or Vaibhashika scriptures. So mastering the samadhi is explained in Abhidharma as mastering 9 kinds of samadhi. Hmm? These 9 kinds of samadhi can also be called the 9 kinds of uh, dhyana. Hmm? Dhyana and samadhi, they are in a way used as uh, the synonyms. But we have to be very careful. Samadhi has a much wider meaning. The dhyana means just one-pointedness of a wholesome mind. This is the definition of the dhyana in the early Buddhism. So we have to have the one-pointedness of the wholesome mind to be able to practice dhyana. But as far as samadhi is concerned, its scope is very wide. According to Theravada Abhidharma, in order that the mind appears, in order that the thinking process directed to a concrete object appears, there has to be ability of the mind to put the other mental factors together. According to Theravada, therefore, the samadhi must exist in mild form in each and every process of uh, cognition, no matter whether wholesome or unwholesome. Hmm? All process of cognition presupposes samadhi. Because without samadhi, the other mental factors like attention, like sensation, perception, and so on, they could not keep together. That which keeps them together, that is samadhi. But samadhi also is like everything is a development. When this faculty, samadhi is also a faculty, when this positive faculty of samadhi is further developed, then it uh, also makes the wholesome states of mind more and more clear. So samadhi is like, say, like the light of the mind, which becomes very clear when it is developed. So, because samadhi is a kind of a light of the mind, then it is closely linked to wisdom. The wisdom is symbolized by light, huh? Putting light into what we perceive. That is what the concentration does to us. When we perceive, when we feel with a clear mind, we perceive, we feel different. And what we perceive and what we feel determines how we think. how we cognize the object. That's why they are called the chitta samskara, the formations of the mind. The other mental factors are also formations of the mind, but they are not introduced as independent aggregates. Huh? Among the five aggregates, uh, we have, there has to be an object, there has to be a form, so that uh, this form can be cognized. In order to be cognized, it has to be perceived. Perceived means we have to uh, grasp the image of the object we want to uh, think about. When we grasp the image of the object we want to think about, we will then sense it or feel it. That means we will receive it, the mind will receive it. When the mind can receives it, it will be able to differentiate it. Hmm? And it differentiates it by the mental factors, starting with the will, because only by will we can maintain the mind on the desired object and differentiate it clearly. So in each and every process of differentiation, we have the five aggregates, and in order to keep them together, there has to be some centrifugal force keeping the other uh, things that appear in the process of cognition together. And that is samadhi too. When this samadhi is developed by the process of mindfulness, or process of uh, awareness, awareness and mindfulness develops the our ability to perceive things in samadhi, to perceive them as they are. Then the one-pointedness of the mind has a continuity on the object, and when the one-pointedness of the mind has continuity on the object, it becomes the dhyana. So in basic Buddhism, we, in order to learn Buddhism in depth, we have to cultivate 9 kinds of uh, samadhi. 9 kinds of samadhi. The first 8 kinds of samadhi, they are called technically the 8 samapatis. Samapati means attainments. So in order to master samadhi, according to the early teachings of the agamas, we have to practice the 8 kinds of attainments of samapatis. Uh, this practice of these 8 kinds of attainments then will appease the mind and will make the mind powerful. Without the mind being powerful, there is no way to get liberation. This is what the Buddhist scriptures clearly explain. Hmm? In the Jhana Samyutta, for example, of the Samyutta Nikaya, we have the suttas which compare the practice of jhana to swimming from this side of the Ganges, of the river, to the other side of the Ganges. The other side, of course, traditionally means in yoga, in Buddhism, the side which is freed from suffering, where the mind attains liberation. Of course, the physical suffering no one can avoid, including the bodhisattva. But the mental suffering is definitely avoidable, and that which avoids it is precisely the practice of deep understanding of the practice of shamatha and vipassana, which we understand as being the Buddhist yoga, or uh, the practice of yoga for Buddhism is the practice of shamatha and vipassana. And without the yoga, without joining the highest reality, without being linked to the highest reality, there is no relation, there is no liberation. So, in order to learn how to swim from this side of life in which we are confronted with all kinds of uh, mental turmoil, and to get to the other side, which is free from mental turmoil, we have to learn jhana. Like, in order to get from this uh, side of the river to the other side, especially of a wide river like the river Ganges, uh, especially in the Bengal or in the Bihar, where it is close to flowing to the ocean, then one has to be a very good swimmer. Being a very good swimmer means being a master of the jhana as far as Buddhist scriptures are concerned. And being the master of the jhana means being the master of the 8 samapatis. Now, we have said that in order to learn Buddhism, in early scriptures, we have to know 9 kinds of samadhi. Which is the last kind of samadhi? It is the samadhi of vipassana. What is samadhi of vipassana? Samadhi of vipassana is the samadhi of seeing the arising and passing away of all the phenomena moment by moment. For that, we also need samadhi. We also need deep concentration. But that concentration is different from a one pointed mind on one single object. Hmm? In Vipassana, we uh, have to change the object, but we change the object with understanding, not without understanding. And this understanding is brought about by the light of uh, created by concentrated mind. By this light of the concentrated mind, we see that whatever object we hold in mind, whatever form we hold in mind, it arises and appears each and every moment. It arises and appears due to causes and conditions, and according to Abhidharma Kosha, it ceases naturally. This is very important. According to the Theravada Abhidharma, it also ceases according to causes and conditions. According to Abhidharma Kosha, it, according to Vaibhashika, it ceases naturally. It does not need any cause to cease. It ceases as soon as it arises. So uh, this is very important to understand this difference. This also leads us to the better understanding of the tradition of Shamatha and Vipassana as it developed in the northern tradition in especially in China and in Tibet. So that would point out that the state of mind without an object, and in order to change an object, there has to be a gap. Hmm? So in the state without an object, where is the mind? Hmm? This is a big question, which has been uh, discussed in in Abhidharma, and to which different thinkers found very different solutions. So the Vipassana is observing in deep concentration the mind which arises and passes away, and uh, it arises and passes away. It must arise and pass away as soon as it holds a concrete object, as it differentiates an object from the other objects. When we differentiate one object from the other, then definitely the mind has to, when it grasps the form of the object, the picture of the object, it must arise and pass away in each and every instant, no matter whether it is an object of jhana, of a deep one-pointed concentration, or an object in our normal cognition. Hmm? Whenever the mind grasps the object, it definitely has to arise and pass away moment by moment. This is what the uh, Buddha and Buddhist yogis have found, and they accordingly uh, experience it also through uh, deep understanding of this process. So uh, we have 9 kinds of samadhi which we should learn if we want to master the Buddhist meditation according to the early scriptures. Now, uh, the samadhi of vipassana is then the samadhi of uh, passing, of arising and passing away. When we advance in vipassana, it will be only passing away of each and every phenomena which appear. So when we engage in this samadhi of passing and arising of phenomena in each and every moment, in each and every kshana, hmm, our mind can have intuition into that which is beyond impermanence. Hmm? So this is the ultimately this intuition leads, when it is uh, developed in depth, it leads to opening to the uh, supermundane reality. Huh? The mind which arises and passes away is a mind belonging to the mundane reality. This is what the early Buddhist scriptures explain. But nirvana is not the mundane reality, it is a super mundane reality. That is why it can liberate us from the mundane suffering. If it was a mundane object, we would not be able to uh, get liberation from the mundane suffering. But because it is the object which surpasses the mundane experience, therefore it can lead us to its deeper understanding, its deeper realization can lead us to the state beyond mundane suffering. So these are the basic ideas of early Buddhism, which we have to understand very clearly in order to appreciate the uh, concepts which developed in the uh, in so-called Mahayana Buddhism, in the Bodhisattva path. The Bodhisattva path is indeed inseparable from the path of the disciples, because the Buddha, who is the realized Bodhisattva, he is a teacher of the disciples. So the only difference between the Bodhisattva Arahat and the disciple Arahat is that the Bodhisattva Arahat, he has the deeper knowledge of this ultimate reality, the sorrow knowledge of the ultimate reality. The sorrow knowledge of the ultimate reality is the uh, deepening of the non-dualistic understanding of shamatha and vipassana. So back to the basic concepts of shamatha, we have discussed roughly the idea of the vipassana samadhi. Vipassana samadhi leads in early Buddhist teachings through uh, the deeper understanding of impermanence, its sorrowful nature, its selflessness, and the impurity of existence in impermanence. It leads to the direct seeing of the ultimate reality. Hmm? The direct seeing of the ultimate reality is also connected with a jhana. We cannot have seeing of ultimate reality, the reality in which there is nothing to grasp, without jhana. That is why the jhana is so important. Dhyana is so important for experiencing the highest reality. Hmm? So uh, the highest reality, when it is revealed in dhyana, but the object of this dhyana is not a worldly object. The object of the supermundane dhyana, which is, so to say, the gate to liberation, the object of the supermundane dhyana is the object which cannot be grasped in mind. That which cannot be grasped in mind is, so to say, beyond the mind. Not exactly beyond the mind, because that which can understand it is also nothing else than the mind, but it is beyond the mind, beyond the worldly mind, and the worldly mind is the mind which uh, grasps the objects, receives the object as something existent, and accordingly differentiates it from other objects. Of course, we cannot live without this process of differentiations, but this differentiation is, so to say, from the point of view of the non-dual understanding of shamatha and vipassana, is illusionary. So, in this sense, the world is illusionary, and when one has intuition into the supermundane object, what will happen? Well, uh, simple things will happen. One will also start considering the worldly experience as illusionary. So one will be able to detach from the worldly experience. Detachment from the worldly experience is, in early Buddhism, the process of attaining the Magga the fruit of the path. There are four fruits of the path. When we attain the fourth fruit of the path, we are liberated, we become the arahats, and we have, we no more grasps object appearing to the six doors of the senses, and that is the content of liberation of an arahat. He detaches from the six doors of perception. Six doors of perceptions are also the six doors of feeling. He detaches from them, so he does not grasp any object in particular. So uh, he has, he produces no more karma, which is the cause of karma means accumulation of deeds. Ayuhana, this accumulation of deeds is the cause of continuity in the state of worldly existence, in the state of the unsatisfactoriness, in the state of suffering. So, uh, in order to attain detachment from the worldly existence, we have to practice three kinds of doors to three kinds of methods, three kinds of doors or entrances to nirvana. According to Abhidharma, when we emphasize the practice of observing momentary appearance and disappearance of all the phenomena appearing in the mind, then we attain the entrance into nirvana through uh, the contemplation of impermanence. Contemplation of impermanence leads to the entering the door of nirvana, entering the supramundane reality by the practice of animita samadhi, of the samadhi with no sign, signless samadhi. In order to attain the highest reality, the supermundane reality, the ultimate reality, we have to practice the signless samadhi. Signless samadhi is the result, according to Abhidharma, of the deepened practice of observing momentariness in impermanence. This momentariness in impermanence exists even in the state of mind in one-pointedness based on an object, because it is still based on grasping the some kind of object. So when the mind grasps some kind of object, it is in uh, it is in the mundane state. Even when it is in dhyana, it is still in mundane state, because whatever the mind grasps is in the process of impermanence, and accordingly the mind which grasps is also in the process of impermanence. So when one emphasizes in one's Vipassana practice the selflessness of the five aggregates of the person and also of the phenomena. Then one will enter the supermundane reality by the uh, samadhi of selflessness. Hmm? And when one practices detachment on the base of letting go, on the base of nirvana, then one will enter the supermundane state by the door of desirelessness, apranihita. Hmm? So this desirelessness, apranihita, the selflessness, shunyata, and the signlessness, animita, they are the three doors through three kinds of supermundane samadhi, according to the Abhidharma teaching, through which the practitioner gets the direct intuition of nirvana. When one gets the direct intuition of nirvana, what we experience in the world is, of course, there. No one can deny it, but it becomes no more object of very obstinate grasping. This is the advantage of realizing, of having intuition in regard to these three doors of liberation. The three doors of liberation can only be touched in the state of jhana, can only be experienced in the state of jhana. We can have the theoretical knowledge of them, but they will not change the our understanding of ourselves and of the world. The power of their experience can only change the nature of our experience when it is experienced in jhana. And in order to experience in jhana, we need a very strong mind. And so the traditional idea of practicing the jhana is to cultivate a strong mind. Without a strong mind, we also have, this is also idea of traditional yoga in the Hindu scriptures. Without having a strong mind, we cannot experience liberation. And practicing the strong mind, cultivating the strong mind is the practice of the jhana. In the Abhidharma teachings as presented in early Buddhism, which explain the path of the disciples, it also explains to some extent the path of the Bodhisattva, of the Buddha, but only not philosophically, only in terms of his deeds. So, in order to become a disciple, one has to practice the traditional eight samapatis. The traditional eight samapatis are practiced on the base of the objects. Uh, in Abhidharma, you will find descriptions of these objects. They are in some scriptures 40, some scriptures 38. It does not mean that they are only 40 or 38 and or sometimes less, 20 and so on. Objects of suitable for deep concentration, for cultivating a strong mind. It does not mean that there are only so many objects for cultivating strong mind, for cultivating dhyana, for cultivating a wholesome one-pointedness of wholesome mind. There are many, many others, but uh, these are traditionally discussed in the scriptures. So the state of the dhyana is practiced by uh, developing one-pointed concentration on a particular object. The most common object for this purpose, which is kind of an introduction to meditation in all traditions, is the concentration on the breath. Concentration of the breath is kind of the most suitable object for developing the mindfulness, smrti, and smrti is the mindfulness is a base for concentration. Without this base, no shamatha, no vipassana can happen. So the meditation on the breath is traditionally the meditation for developing the power of mindfulness. Mindfulness is also like samadhi, a positive faculty which we definitely need in order to get insight. So the basic meditation for developing the concentration based on right mindfulness is meditation on the breath. It's called anapana smrti or anapana sati. So the breath, according to Buddhism, is also, according to early Buddhism, according to the agamas, is also the meditation which the Buddha has practiced under the Bodhi tree, and it is also the meditation uh, which he uh, used to practice from, so to say, from early childhood. He, so to say, had a natural ability to enter jhana even in early uh, childhood due to his previous experiences in the previous lives. And when he has when he went uh, to when he uh, abandoned his palace, when he practiced Naishkramya, the going away from household existence into the uh, into the existence of the yogi, of the Shramana. In India, we have two civilizations: the civilization of the Brahmanas, so we may call it the uh, priests, and the civilization of the Shramanas, of the yogis who go to houselessness in order to directly realize, not by rituals, but by one's effort, Shramana. So, uh, Buddha, when he became Shramana, when he became an ascetic, he then also continued the practice of the dhyanas to make his cultivate a powerful mind. And he, so the tradition has it, he has mastered all the 8 kinds of samapatis so well that his teachers, hmm, his two great teachers, requested him to teach it, but he refused to become their uh, chosen disciple because he had intuition that this cannot be the dhyana based on an object which the mind grasps, cannot be the uh, content of liberation. Because when you in dhyana, what is the advantage of dhyana? In dhyana, there is no defilement. Why there is no defilement? Because there is no akusala vedana, there is no unwholesome sensation. Unwholesome sensation does not exist in dhyana because there is no unwholesome sensation. So the mind has no suffering. But when the mind goes out of dhyana, and it and necessarily has to happen sooner or later when one holds the object in order to stay in dhyana, then again there will be unsatisfactory state as before. So when you get out of dhyana and observe the mind immediately preceding mind, which is still in dhyana, then you will see that actually this mind in dhyana is also an impermanent mind. And what is impermanent belongs to the worldly existence, not to the liberation. So this is the basic idea we have to realize in order to get a clear idea of what we practice and how to practice and how the this basic concept eventually develop into the uh, kinds of meditations that is practiced now in China and in Tibet. Hmm? So in order to understand these meditations, we have to have some clear ideas of what the 8 samapatis are and how to get them, and uh, what the basic vipassana is, how to get it. And so when we know these 9 kinds of samadhi, which are the content of the traditional training in samadhi in the early Buddhism, then we can get a better idea of how these ideas eventually changed on the base of the uh, transcendental wisdom philosophy, which developed maybe parallel to the Abhidharma development of the Abhidharma schools in uh, in Buddhism. This transcendental wisdom philosophy uh, might have been there from very early time, but was only systematized later, uh, the same time when this Abhidharma school, different Abhidharma school were systematized. That means starting with our era, huh? Where this also the first scriptures were written down. Before they were written down, they were oral tradition. These teachings were so highly appreciated that even so the writing was there, nobody dared to put them down in writing. So in order to remember these teachings, so the in early times of Buddhism, the disciples were supposed to learn by heart uh, the, the Abhidharma and the transcendental wisdom. They were the teachings which were taught from teachers to the disciples, and disciples have to retain them by heart. So later they became systematized, put into writing, and when they were systematized and put into writing, then developed all kinds of separate schools of Buddhism. Hmm. So I think that much for today in the as uh, uh, introduction, and next lesson we will discuss the 8 kinds of samapatis and some basic ideas connected with them. Hmm? Also some basic ideas of Vipassana, how Vipassana is in early Buddhism. Vipassana is not Shamatha, Shamatha is not Vipassana. Hmm? The Shamatha or Samadhi is only the cause of Vipassana, but it is not Vipassana. Hmm? It is the cause of Vipassana. It is the cause of wisdom. It is the cause of awareness. Without samadhi, we cannot practice awareness. We cannot practice deep wisdom. We cannot practice the deep insight. It is impossible. But the samadhi is presented only as the cause of insight. Insight is different, and samadhi is different. So, for example, in Abhidharma, this practice of the dhyana, there is a very nice comparison. Uh, the one practicing the path is compared to a warrior. Hmm? And Shramana is a warrior. Shramana is the one who puts effort who into fighting the defilements of the mind. One who fights the defilements of the mind is a Shramana, is the ascetic. This is a real meaning of asceticism. Now, in order to fight the defilements of the mind, one needs a vipassana. The shamatha is not enough, because when one gets out of samadhi, as we have explained, one still gives rise to defilements. So, in the Abhidharma commentary, the practicing shamatha, practicing dhyana is like the warrior who defends the city. Hmm? Of course, the city is compared to purity of the mind, is also compared to nirvana very often in the scriptures. So one who defends the uh, city or town on in early times, all towns were surrounded by town walls. And on the town walls, you had the turret, the small towers, in which the warriors, when they were defending the city, used to rest, so that the other warriors could replace them to defend the city from the enemy. Similarly, in these the warriors, in order to fight the defilements, he has to rest after fighting for an hour or 2 or 3 the enemy. He becomes very tired, then he rests in these small towers on the town walls, and this resting in the small towers on the town walls is compared to practice of the uh, dhyanas with an object. So you are resting in order to be able to fight, and to fight is to practice vipassana, to uproot the defilements. According to the scriptures, the dhyana can only shake away the defilements for a while, but it cannot remove defilements. in order to remove defilements, one has to practice Vipassana. So this is the basic idea. So the Samadhi is the cause of Vipassana, but it is not the Vipassana. Yet in deep Vipassana is in Samadhi. And when there is a deep Vipassana, then one sees the arising and passing away of all the phenomena appearing in the mind moment by moment. Then the mind can turn to the reality which is beyond suffering. This is the basic concept of early Buddhism, of the meditation practice. And when it turns away from the suffering of impermanence, it does so by uh, uh, practicing these three uh, approaches, by deep insight into impermanence. One gets into insight of about the signlessness of the ultimate reality. By practicing selflessness, uh, the one gets insight into the emptiness of the ultimate reality. By practicing deep concentration and detaching from everything, one gets the insight into the desirelessness of the ultimate reality. So this is how the jhana is the gate to the realization. So that much for today, and tomorrow we will discuss the basic practice of the jhanas and how it can be used for understanding the what has developed in the Mahayana concept of meditation.